Like most main characters that you might find in an RPG, an anime, or a gacha game, the Rover from Wuthering Waves ticks all the typical protagonist checkboxes. They have a yet to be explained power or ability, they seem to attract many people despite hardly ever saying a word, and most importantly, they have a rather mysterious and unknown past which they have conveniently forgotten. Despite the mystery that surrounds them though, what if I were to tell you that we may actually know where they could be from? In fact, there are clues that suggest that the rover might actually be someone from a different time period altogether. That's what we'll be discussing in this video. The rather mysterious origins of the rover and the very real possibility that they might actually be from the future. Before we explain that in further detail though, if you want to see more Wuthering Waves or Honkai Star Rail lore content, do consider subscribing to the channel. Given the title of the video, I'm sure it won't surprise you to learn that we will be discussing topics that appear only in the later parts of the game. So if you haven't completed the 1.0 main story, then you might want to do that first. If you don't particularly care about spoilers, then let's forge ahead. Also, just to preempt you, this theory is a little goofy and a bit confusing. In fact, I had to think twice about actually posting it, but stick around to the end and hopefully I do a good enough job that it makes sense. Now, there's actually quite a few theories related to who the rover is. Some suggest that they are from the past and are far older than their appearance might suggest. Others claim they are an interdimensional god, beings that originate from outside the current reality who have come to Solaris 3 to either save it or carry out some unknown plan. In due time, we'll talk about these other possibilities, but in this video, we are going to explore one very specific idea. An idea that suggests that perhaps the rover is actually from the future. Now, the thing that kind of tipped me off to this, or at least got me thinking about it, is this very scene right here. When we visit the Court of Cervante research lab, we eventually run into the cutscene of the elder male researcher. In this cutscene, there is a moment where he speaks of a future being hailing from our past. This in itself implies that in the past and perhaps present, there is someone here on Solaris 3 that is literally from the future. The researcher continues talking and makes a request to an unseen individual, and shortly after, a hologram of a woman appears. This woman is the very same person we see at the very start of the game, and the one that seemingly sent the rover into the world of Solaris 3. I'm sure you're wondering by now, if the elder researcher was originally speaking to this hologram lady, then why would I think that the rover is the person from the future? Well, you see, as the researcher said that line about a future being hailing from our past, the camera pans to the rover. This is a typical trope that's used to imply that the sentence spoken refers to whoever is currently being shown in frame. It's also not impossible to think that both the rover and the hologram lady are from the same future, since the opening shows them to be in the same location. Alto even asks the rover whether they recognize her, and when the rover responds that they might vaguely remember her, it's clearly a hint that the hologram lady and the rover might be in some way linked. Now, if this were all there is, this idea might not be substantial enough to warrant a video all its own, but there is more to this. In the main story, there was a scene or moment where the main character was looking for information on their past, because of the amnesia. As they look through the archives of Jinzo, there is an excerpt of a hero from the past that had similar abilities and descriptions to the rover, who had once saved the city from complete annihilation. Many believe this historic figure to be the rover themselves due to the similarities mentioned, but it also aligns with the thing the researcher mentioned before of a future being hailing from our past. So it's possible that the rover we see right now is the very same person that was around in the past, and there's evidence that might corroborate this. A little later into the story, we begin our search for the secretive organization referred to as the Black Shores. The sole clue we get is a picture of their supposed symbol, a flower called the Blake Bloom. When the rover sees the flower, they immediately have flashbacks involving the Sentinel Jue, and the flower can also be seen pinned on their jacket. What I think this implies is that at some time in the past, the rover did indeed save Jinzo, and in the process likely showcased their abilities, which was then recorded in the archives. I also think that the rover was the founder of the Black Shores, or at the very least knew of them back in the past and perhaps was even a member. This is why when Alto asked whether the rover knew the hologram lady and rover responded with a maybe, Alto wasn't shocked at all. Alto likely knew who the rover and the hologram lady was. Perhaps after forming or joining the Black Shores in the past, this knowledge was passed down so that later generations would know what to look for. I mean, even the symbol of the Black Shores, the Blake Bloom flower, has a similar color scheme to the Rover. Clearly, the Rover, who is edgy and likes to dress up in all black and white attire, would also choose a similarly edgy symbol if they indeed formed the Black Shores. But this only implies that the Rover was in the past, right? Isn't the video about them being from the future? Well, I'm getting to that, but I warn you, the next part will get a little bit more confusing. So we know that the person in the past could likely be the Rover, and at the same time, we know that the elder researcher spoke of a future being hailing from our past. I think what this means is that the future being is from the future, but is also involved in the stories of the past. And the only way to accomplish this is through time travel. How else can you be from the future, but at the same time exist in the past? You might be wondering then, how could time travel even be possible? It's not outright mentioned in the game, so it's a bit of a stretch to just assume, isn't it? The thing is, much of the phenomena we see related to the lament actually allows for the possibility of time travel. In fact, if we dive deeper into these phenomena, such as with the retroact rain, the etheric sea, and gravity loss, you'll actually see that timey-wimey stuff is indeed possible. I've made a video talking about this very topic, so I'd suggest checking that out if you want a deeper dive into those subjects, but the crash course is essentially this. The retroact rain is a concentration of remnant energy that has a peculiar effect of creating visions of the past. While the descriptions of these visions may make you think they are just illusions, it's very clearly mentioned they are actual glimpses into the past itself. In fact, Alto mentions that most researchers who looked into retroact rain do so because they want to view a past event or see their long-dead loved ones. Jian also experiences this when his old friend appears during the course of the main story when he was in the midst of the retroact rain. The reversing of time is presumably why the rain appears as though it falls upwards into the sky, collecting into the etheric sea. The etheric sea, in turn, appears as a collector pool of water suspended in the sky. Given the retroact rain is able to conjure the past, it's very likely the etheric sea might have similar properties as well, given they are made from the same substance. In fact, I started to think that the etheric sea could be some medium or portal that might enable time travel itself, but it hasn't explicitly been mentioned in the story. That said, in the opening cutscene, the Rover did turn up in the etheric sea after the hologram lady cast them out to Solaris 3, but I digress. Despite not explicitly mentioned, let's assume these phenomena do indeed have these properties. At this point, we know that the Rover might indeed have visited the past, we know that the wave-worn phenomena like the etheric sea and the retroact rain have properties that might allow for time travel, and we know that the elder researcher referred to both the Rover and the hologram lady as potential future beings. What we don't have is the why. Why would the Rover, if they were indeed from the future, need to come back to the past at all? You might think that we may not have the answer for this, but surprisingly, we might actually have it, and it's related to the Frexitors. Now, you don't need to know everything about this faction, all you need to know is that they have basically two main goals. The first is to bring about the next lament, one they refer to as the True Lament, which, if you recall, is the event that triggered all these wonky phenomena in the first place. The second is for humanity to evolve through the absorption of the Tacit Discords. What you also need to know is that the research that the Court of Cervante have been carrying out was actually partly funded by an overseer of the Frexitors. This might imply that the goals I mentioned earlier may tie back to what we learned in the research lab and with the elder researcher. This is where we reach the crux of this idea, the main purpose for the Rover's time-traveling adventures. I think that the Rover is someone from the future who has evolved to a point of perhaps ascending or becoming a god through absorbing TDs and has now been sent into the past to ensure specific outcomes happen. One that likely leads to the salvation and the evolution of humanity that may allow them to overcome the lament and perhaps the shepherds. The elder researcher mentions that their group had failed as they had walked through the false gate. And he urges the beings from the future to keep pushing forward until the real gate, the one that can change the world, is found. This might imply that the Rover and the hologram lady have been doing whatever it is they are doing multiple times by this point. When the elder researcher states that they are our past but also our future, it might be a reference to how the Rover is constantly going back into the past to correct things but is also the ultimate endpoint of all humanity itself. If humanity's evolution relates to the absorption of the TDs, at least according to the Fractsidus, the only person we know who can actually do that and fits this description is the Rover. So it makes sense that if the Rover is from the future, they would likely be the most evolved version of humanity, one that can absorb TDs into their bodies without relying on the Pangu terminals. This might also be why the Fractsidus wants the Rover to join them, given the Rover is, in essence, what they strive to become as well. The scene we see at the very beginning of the game might in actuality be the Rover at the very end of the story, where the Lament has left everything decimated. In order to remedy this, the Rover is sent back in time at specific intervals to assist humanity and fix the damage the Lament is causing, and perhaps put in measures to ensure humanity succeeds. This might explain why they ensure Jinzo's existence and possibly form the Black Shores. Plus, have you noticed that based on the story we are currently experiencing and the past story covered in the archives, the Rover seems to appear only during times when the Wave 1 phenomena is at its worst. This again ties in with the idea that the Etheric Sea and the Retroact Rain may allow for some form of time travel, and why the Rover, assuming the person in the past was indeed them, have only appeared at these specific times, once in the past and currently during the main story. In fact, when the Rover first entered into this world in that opening cutscene, they literally came out of the Etheric Sea. So, long story short, the Rover is likely an agent working alongside the hologram lady and is being sent back in time at key points to put in place measures that would allow humanity to overcome the Lament or some unseen enemy. The Rover is the final point of humanity itself, the peak of its evolutionary path, and is sent back like the Terminator to ensure humanity survives. Functionally, the Rover is the Terminator and the hologram lady is kinda like John Connor. Or another example would be like in the movie Interstellar, where the beings that place the wormhole are actually humans from the future. Alternatively, perhaps the scene we see at the very start is just one version of the story that the Rover has lived through, and having failed to choose the right gate, returns to the past to try again. Though this secondary idea is a bit more confusing to explain due to the person in the past also being the Rover, so just ignore it for now. Now, as interesting as this whole idea may seem, let me remind you that we are barely into the main story of Wuthering Waves, and there is still so much we still don't know. Nothing here is definitive, and as more of the story unfolds, things may ultimately change. So don't think of this theory as the end-all be-all, and ensure you have a giant bucket of salt to temper your expectations. It's mostly just for fun and nothing more. Plus, as I mentioned at the very beginning, there are a myriad of different possibilities related to the Rover. They might be someone from the ancient past, maybe they are an extra-dimensional god, or maybe they are a sentinel. We just don't know. In any case, I think I've blabbed enough on this video, so I'll bring it to a close. Let me know what you think in the comments. Does this theory make sense, or do you think the Rover is someone else entirely? If you enjoyed watching the video, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.